The shock that changed everything. June 4th, 1943. A train through Texas. His pencil shook as he wrote in his hidden diary. If his officers found it, he'd be thrown in solitary. But he had to record what he was seeing. The Americans must be lying to us. No country could have this much while fighting a war on two fronts. Through the train window he watched something impossible. Electric lights. Everywhere. Every farmhouse. Every street corner. Every shop window. An endless sea of lights stretching across the Texas plains at 10 p.m. Back in Germany, blackout rules had kept the country dark since 1940. Even before the war, only 20% of German farms had electricity. But here in America, the country Nazi propaganda called weak and collapsing, electricity flowed like water. 1,850 battle-hardened Afrika Korps veterans stepped off that train in Mexia, Texas. They'd fought in the desert. They'd earned the Iron Cross. They thought they were tough. What they didn't know was that this moment would shatter everything they believed. The journey begins. It started in Tunisia, May 13th, 1943. General von Arnim surrendered. 250,000 German and Italian soldiers became prisoners in a single day. These weren't fresh recruits. These were Rommel's best. Men who'd driven the British back to Egypt. Soldiers who'd earned respect from even their enemies. Now they were POWs, and their education was about to begin. The first shock came in Algeria, waiting for transport ships. American efficiency was like nothing they'd seen. Thousands of prisoners processed daily, photographed, examined, vaccinated. Rights explained in perfect German by American officers who'd trained specifically for this. Then came the food. One German soldier wrote home 8 months later, "While we waited for ships, the Americans fed us better than we'd eaten in 6 months of desert fighting. White bread, real coffee, meat twice a day. We thought it was propaganda. We didn't realize this was their standard ration." The Atlantic crossing. The Liberty ships carrying them were miracles of production. Built in just over 4 days at Kaiser shipyards, 3 ships completed per day at peak production. If the Germans had known this, they would have called it impossible propaganda. The 2-week crossing became a floating classroom. One prisoner kept detailed notes. The ship's crew threw away more food each day than our entire company got in a week. Half-eaten steaks, whole loaves of bread, gallons of milk that sat too long. They did this without thinking. Their supply was endless. A Prussian officer, whose family had served in every German war since Frederick the Great, watched the radar antenna rotating above the bridge. This technology, which we believed only we and perhaps the British had, was standard equipment on a cargo ship. That's when I first suspected Germany had already lost the war. First sight of America, August 2nd, 1943. Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. Nothing prepared them for what they saw. The port stretched for miles. Dozens of ships loading and unloading at once. In a single day, this one port handled more cargo than all of Hamburg managed in a week. One prisoner counted 47 cargo ships in various stages of loading. Each crane lifted loads that would have needed a dozen men and horses in Germany. They moved smoothly, continuously, powered by electricity. Then came the parking lots. Hundreds of cars. Regular dock workers' cars. In Germany, only the wealthy and party elite owned cars. The people's car, the Volkswagen, had been promised since 1934, but fewer than 1,000 civilians ever got one. Here, ordinary workers drove to their jobs in their own cars, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared them for the trains. The train journey that changed minds. Not boxcars, not freight wagons, full passenger coaches, Pullman cars with padded seats that converted to sleeping berths, dining cars with white tablecloths and silver cutlery, observation cars with panoramic windows. One prisoner wrote, "We boarded like tourists, not prisoners." One American sergeant apologized that the air conditioning wasn't working properly. Air conditioning. We thought such luxury only existed on Hitler's personal train. The 3-day journey from Norfolk to Texas became more destructive to Nazi ideology than any military defeat. As the trains rolled through Virginia, they pressed their faces to the windows. Every small town blazed with light. Martinsville, Danville, Greensboro, places that in Germany would be lucky to have one street lamp, displayed illuminated shop windows, electric signs, houses with lights in multiple rooms. They passed factories running night shifts, windows glowing, parking lots full even at midnight. One prisoner whose father was a Nazi party leader wrote, "We passed dozens of cities that first night. Each one had more electricity than all of Hamburg. The guard said this was normal, that every American town had electricity since the 1920s. I called him a liar. The Industria, giant Awakens through Tennessee and Kentucky, they saw factories that made German industry look like medieval workshops. The Alcoa aluminum plant in Tennessee stretched 3 miles along the river. It consumed 175,000 kilowatts of power, more than the entire city of Munich." Near Louisville, they passed the Rubbertown complex, 4 massive facilities producing 800,000 tons of synthetic rubber annually. Germany, despite inventing the process, never managed more than 120,000 tons in its best year. One German chemist from E.G. Farben understood immediately. "I knew those plants. Each facility was more advanced than anything we'd built, and there were 4 of them just in this one spot. They said there were dozens more across the country." Then they passed Willow Run outside Detroit. This single factory, built in just 9 months, produced a B-24 bomber every 63 minutes. At peak production, 42,000 workers assembled bombers from 1.5 million parts. The plant used more electricity than the entire German city of Cologne. A Luftwaffe pilot pressed his face to the window and counted 17 B-24s in various stages of completion, visible from the train. We'd been told American planes were inferior, hastily built, would fall apart in combat, but I could see the precision. These weren't inferior aircraft. They were simply built faster than we could imagine. The Heartland's abundance crossing the Mississippi River, they saw barges carrying more grain than Germany's entire 1942 harvest. Grain elevators stretched along both banks, each holding enough wheat to feed a German city for months. A farmer's son from Bavaria wrote, "The Americans transport food like we transport ammunition, in endless quantities without concern for loss. I watched them load a single barge with enough wheat to feed my entire village for 5 years. The crane operator was eating a sandwich with meat thicker than our weekly ration. In Kansas City they stopped at massive stockyards. Tens of thousands of cattle waiting for slaughter. German POWs who'd survived on 200 grams of meat per week, when lucky, watched American workers eating beef sandwiches on their lunch break. They ate meat like we ate bread," one wrote. No, that's wrong. They ate meat like we wished we could eat bread. The camps, a new reality. Camp Hearn, Texas. Built in 4 months. Wooden barracks with electric lights, flush toilets, hot showers, and steam heat. The camp hospital stunned the German medical officers. X-ray machines, surgical equipment, pharmaceutical supplies that had been unavailable in Germany since 1941, all standard for enemy prisoners. They had penicillin, a German chief surgeon later testified. This miracle drug we'd only heard rumours about. They used it freely, even on prisoners with minor infections. German soldiers were dying for basic drugs, and the Americans gave us their most advanced medicine without hesitation. The camp kitchen had walk-in refrigerators, electric mixers, automated dishwashers, gas ranges that could prepare meals for 5,000 men. Daily rations included fresh milk, eggs, meat, vegetables and white bread, quantities German civilians hadn't seen since 1939. A former Munich hotel chef wrote, "Today, we threw away more food than my family has seen in 3 years. Not spoiled food, simply excess. American regulations required 10% more than needed. The surplus was discarded. I wept as I threw perfectly good bread in the garbage, working in America's fields and factories." By September 1943, labour shortages put POWs to work across America. This decision would prove more powerful than any propaganda program. Groups travelled daily to work sites without blindfolds or restrictions. They saw everything. Endless fields, factories running 3 shifts, shops full of goods, parking lots full of cars, houses with refrigerators and radios. At a cotton gin outside Houston, one prisoner watched a single machine process more cotton in an hour than his entire village could handle in a month. The farmer wasn't special, he recorded. Not aristocracy, not a party member, just a farmer. Yet he had electricity, running water, a truck, a car, and a tractor. His workers, including the black men, ate lunch with more food than German workers got in a week, and this was normal. In Nebraska, They worked sugar beet fields and witnessed agricultural mechanization that seemed impossible. A single combine harvester could do the work of 100 men. Fields stretched to the horizon. Farmers casually mentioned yields that would have been fantasy in Germany, 60 bushels per acre compared to Germany's 30 on the best land. One young prisoner wrote about a 16-year-old American farm boy driving a tractor, worth more than everything my father earned in his lifetime. When I mentioned this, the boy laughed and said it wasn't even a good tractor. His father was waiting for a new model that would be even better. The factory floor truth. At a Campbell soup factory in New Jersey, prisoners watched production lines process more tomatoes in a day than most German factories handled in a month. Operated by a skeleton crew of women and elderly men, the young workers were in the military, yet production exceeded peacetime levels. Everything was automated, wrote one German who'd worked in food processing before the war. Electric conveyor belts, automatic filling machines, steam cookers processing hundreds of cans simultaneously. One elderly woman monitored controls that would have required 50 workers in Germany. She did this while listening to the radio and drinking coffee. Near Detroit, prisoners unloading coal glimpsed the River Rouge complex across the water. 100,000 workers producing jeeps, aircraft engines and tanks. The plant consumed 1.5 million kilowatts daily, more than the entire city of Hamburg. We could see the parking lots, one wrote. Thousands of cars belonging to workers. In Germany, even our officers rarely owned cars. Here, factory workers drove to work. Many owned 2 cars, one for work, one for family. We thought he was mocking us. The Ideological collapse. By winter 1943, American intelligence officers documented what they called ideological collapse syndrome. Major Paul Newland reported, "The prisoners no longer argue when shown production statistics. They've seen too much. The most fanatical Nazis have become quiet. They still maintain loyalty to Germany, but no longer speak of victory. Many openly question what they were told about America." One lieutenant captured with the 10th Panzer Division wrote in a letter, "We were told America was a mongrel nation, weak, divided, controlled by Jews, incapable of military prowess. Every day here I see the opposite. This is the most organized, unified, and powerful nation on earth. We were told fairy tales by criminals." Christmas 1943. The turning point. American organization sent 500,000 Christmas packages to German POWs. Enemies who'd been trying to kill American soldiers months earlier. Churches, civic groups, even Boy Scouts sent gifts. Local communities invited prisoners to Christmas dinners. At Camp Herney, Texas, the Methodist Church Choir performed carols in German. Women sent homemade cookies. Boy Scouts delivered handmade Christmas cards. This kindness toward enemies shattered what remained of Nazi racial theory. One officer whose brother died in the Hamburg bombing wrote, "They know we're their enemies. Many have sons fighting against us, yet they show us Christian charity, not propaganda, but genuine kindness. What kind of people treat enemies this way? Only those absolutely certain of victory." The Christmas feast itself defied comprehension. Turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, gravy, vegetables, pies, ice cream, quantities of food Germany hadn't seen since before World War I. "We ate like kings," one wrote. "Better than German generals, better than party leaders, and this wasn't special. They said this was a normal American Christmas dinner, that every family was eating the same meal. If they feed prisoners this way, what must their own soldiers eat?" Education and transformation. By early 1944, over 40,000 German prisoners enrolled in educational programs: English, American history, mathematics, sciences. The University of Chicago provided correspondence courses. Stanford sent professors to lecture on democracy and economics. Prisoners who'd been told Americans were cultureless barbarians discovered libraries with millions of books, universities that welcomed all social classes, scientific research leading the world. They read American newspapers freely, comparing multiple viewpoints, something impossible in Nazi Germany. A German physicist wrote, "American professors, including Jewish refugees from Germany, taught us without hatred. They spoke of science as universal, belonging to all humanity. They were years ahead of German research, and they shared knowledge with enemies. This generosity was incomprehensible to minds shaped by Nazi ideology. Camp theatres showed Hollywood films, not propaganda but regular movies. They watched Gone with the Wind and The Grapes of Wrath, amazed that Americans showed such self-criticism to enemies. "They hide nothing," wrote one lieutenant. "They show their problems, failures, conflicts. Yet this honesty makes them stronger, not weaker. In Germany, such criticism would mean death. Here it's considered patriotic." D-Day, the final proof. June 6, 1944. News of the Normandy invasion reached the camps. 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 150,000 men in the first wave. Prisoners watched newsreels within days. They saw endless streams of ships, artificial harbours, supply systems delivering 15,000 tons daily across open beaches. One officer wrote, "We knew then that everything was lost, not just the war, but the entire Nazi project. We challenged the world's greatest industrial power with fairy tales and racial mythology. We sent horses against their trucks, rifles against their automatic weapons, courage against their unlimited resources." The liberation of truth. April 1945 brought the final revelation. As American forces liberated concentration camps, the footage was shown to German POWs. Many refused to believe it at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. Testimony from American soldiers, photographs, newsreels. Eventually, letters from Germany confirming the horror. The psychological impact was devastating. Men who'd maintained some pride despite military defeat now faced complete moral collapse. Everything they'd fought for wasn't just defeated, it was evil. One soldier wrote, "We thought we were warriors for a great cause. We discovered we were tools of criminals. We believed we were bringing civilization to inferior peoples. We found that we were the barbarians. The Americans we called weak and decadent showed us what civilization actually meant." Returning home changed forever. Between 1945 and 1946, 371,683 German POWs were repatriated from American camps. They returned to a Germany divided, destroyed, and desperate. But they brought something precious. Knowledge of how a democratic industrial society worked. Many rose to prominence in West Germany's reconstruction. They became ambassadors, politicians, business leaders, agricultural reformers. They brought American methods to German industry, American efficiency to German agriculture, American democratic ideals to German politics. "We learned that prosperity came from freedom, not conquest," one later wrote. "We saw that democracy created wealth, that diversity brought strength, that treating workers well increased production. These lessons shaped the new Germany." The remarkable statistics. The numbers tell an extraordinary story. 500-plus camps across 45 states, 371,683 German POWs held in America. Only 2,222 escape attempts, 0.6%, 0 successful permanent escapes, 95% rated their treatment as good or excellent 40,000, plus enrolled in educational programs. 5,000 eventually immigrated to the US after the war. Thousands maintained correspondence with American families for decades. The 1985 reunion. 40 years after the war ended, over 500 former German POWs returned to Texas for a reunion. They brought their families to show them where their transformation began. A 78-year-old former officer delivered the keynote address. "We came to America as enemies, as Nazis, as believers in a lie. We left as friends, as Democrats, as men who'd seen the truth. America showed us that strength comes not from conquest, but from production. Not from hatred, but from diversity. Not from tyranny, but from freedom. We witnessed the arsenal of democracy at full production. We saw farmers who produced food for the world, workers who built the tools of victory, and citizens who treated enemies with dignity. We learned that America's true weapon wasn't its bombs or tanks, but its inexhaustible capacity for creation and its unshakable confidence. We returned to Germany with a mission, to build a society that could create rather than destroy, that could prosper through peace rather than war. The Germany that rose from the ashes was built on lessons learned in American prison camps. We who came as conquerors left as students. To America, from your former enemies, now your friends. Thank you for showing us the way." The auditorium erupted in standing ovation. Americans and Germans together, former enemies united, the greatest victory. In the end, America's greatest victory wasn't on the battlefield. It was in the prison camps where overwhelming evidence of democratic prosperity accomplished what armies could not: the complete transformation of enemy minds. The POWs arrived believing in German superiority and American weakness. They left knowing the truth. The trains that brought them into captivity in 1943 carried warriors of the Third Reich. The ships that returned them to Germany in 1946 carried architects of democracy. They'd seen the future, and it worked. Their story proves that sometimes the greatest victories come not through destruction, but through demonstration. Not through propaganda, but through prosperity. Not through hatred, but through humanity. The German soldiers who witnessed American industrial might became unwitting ambassadors of democracy. They carried back seeds of transformation that bloomed into one of history's most successful reconstructions. Their journey from Nazi warriors to democratic citizens remains one of the most remarkable transformations in modern history, accomplished not through force, but through the overwhelming evidence of what free people could achieve when they worked together. That was America's secret weapon. Not just the ability to produce more tanks and planes than any nation in history, but the capacity to transform enemies into friends through the simple power of example. The German POWs were stunned by America's industrial might, but more importantly, they were changed by it.